Thanks, Nick, and thanks for having me back in Shep. It's probably one of the more familiar places in Australia for a South African, climate-wise. So yeah, I'm going to talk on what we do when it's a bit too warm. Right, so just to start off, this is where we are. This is Shepparton, and you can see that in Africa we run out of land. So everything that we do in apples is north of Shep. This is our biggest region, the Elgin-Villiersdorp region. We're at about 300 meters above sea level, and typically we'll get about 750 chilling hours, but occasionally it goes down to 450, 500. The coldest part of South Africa is the Ceres area. It's high altitude, it's at 1,000 meters, and these guys regularly get the kind of chill that you guys are familiar with, although in recent years we're using more and more rest breaking everywhere in South Africa. We've got a small area north of Lesotho. Before I got here, I thought it was going to be a bit like Stanthorpe, and it kind of looks like Stanthorpe, but it's a bit colder. So yeah, that's where we are. This is the problem from a dormancy point of view that we struggle with. We call it delayed foliation. Basically, the tree bursts unevenly, and it's not uncommon to have fruit and flowers and buds and even dormant buds on the tree at any moment in time. And there's a bunch of stuff that we need to do to manage that. Right, so this is where I live in Elgin. This is 2020 data. It's not the full year, but this is what we're seeing. So that pink line is the long-term average on chill units. And this is 10 years of data, and you immediately notice that only 1 out of the 10 years are colder than the long-term average. So, you know, we regularly hear climate change denialism, but we're experiencing it firsthand. In the last 5 years, we've had another 3 years run along this kind of parallel. So we're seeing warming in terms of chill units happening quite fast. All right, so historically in South Africa, we've had to manage dormancy, and we've done it with rest-breaking agents. So way back, before my time, the guys figured out that if you put oil on the tree at bud burst, you get a better bud burst and a better flowering. And the guys figured out through some research that, you know, you need to use some nitrogen-containing compounds, and the guys came up with DNOC, dinitro-orthocreosol. And that was the main rest-breaking agent mixed in oil, and that lasted through the golden years of our industry. It was, when I was a young guy in the industry, at springtime, everything would turn bright yellow. The tractors, the cars, the dogs, the birds. You'd meet guys with arms that were yellow up till here. So what happened was the Europeans turned around and said, you know, this complicates mammalian reproduction, and you're not allowed to use it. And that's happened to us on a regular basis. So we're allowed to use the compounds in South Africa, but our customers don't want us using the compounds. Anyway, we moved away from the DNOC to Dormex in a big way. I'll get back to that just now. What happens when you don't have enough chill on a branch is this kind of bare wood scenario. So this is bud burst over time on the tip of the shoot and the base of the shoot. And you can see that the terminal bud usually goes. It's slow, but it goes. And then some of the basal buds go, and you end up with this middle piece of the shoot with no bud burst, bare wood. If anyone here has farmed a granny, which you all have, you'll know what bare wood looks like. In granny, it's an architectural thing, as well as it's made worse with a lack of chill. Okay, and the rest breaking agent can normalize this. Okay, we'll get back to that. Okay, so just without getting too technical, I come out of a production and an academic background, but this is how we measure dormancy. So we cut shoots from the field and we stick them in a growth chamber at 25 degrees with continuous light. And we measure how long it takes for those buds to burst. And that's how we measure dormancy. It's kind of an old way that everybody still uses. But what you see in autumn, the buds will burst fast. And then as winter progresses, the buds will burst slower and slower and slower. And then something happens in the buds that we don't understand. And then they start to, where's my start on me? Oh, there we go. And then the buds start to grow faster again. And we've used this curve to study dormancy. I'll share some of the results with you. So this is one of the first bits of work I did. And what you see, so the Bokkerveld is in Ceres. It's our high altitude region. It's one of our coldest regions. And you can see in autumn, the buds are able to grow fast, and then something happens, and they go dormant very quickly, almost from 1 week to the next. And then throughout winter, they come out of dormancy. Whereas in Elgin, where I live, which is a bit warmer, it gets about half the chilling that Ceres gets, they don't go dormant quickly. They kind of keep going dormant. So if you take this data and you show it in a different way, this is the rate of bud burst relative to the amount of chilling received, okay, and this is Utah model units. You can see in Ceres, with the chilling, we come out of dormancy. Whereas in Elgin, in the warm area, we're using up 400 or 500 of our chill units to go dormant. So there's a kind of an opposite process taking place. Okay. What we've done recently, I don't want to get too technical, but we've recently shown that none of the chilling models, if I can go back, this thing's, okay. So while you're going into dormancy, the chilling models don't work. There's just no correlation with chilling and growth rate. And the chilling models only work in this exit phase. The problem is we don't know how to predict that turning point there. So we don't know how to fix the models. Okay. So we know what's wrong and we don't know how to fix it. It's not a great scenario to be in. Okay, so these are galas, and the red line is in the coldest part of the country, and the blue line is is the warmest, and we had some intermediate areas. And what we're able to show with this is, in the cold areas, the buds go dormant quicker, they go dormant faster, they go into a deeper dormancy, but they also come out much quicker. Okay? Whereas in a warm area, that whole process is protracted and stretched out. And you can see in the warm area, kind of, if you left them up to their own devices, they'd flower at Christmas. Okay, that doesn't work. Okay, I also looked at the whole branch formation. It's not just about individual buds. You're talking about branches and shoots and complex trees. And this was a Jonagold shoot in Belgium, and in the cold parts of Australia, you got the same thing. The dominance is always at the top of the shoot. So that's where you get your strongest growth. And if you go down the shoots get shorter and shorter and weaker. That's normal. That doesn't happen when it's too warm. You end up with, I'll show you some pictures, you end up with the terminal goes, but it grows weak. And we end up with this kind of basal dominant tree. I'll show you some pictures just now. Okay, we've been able to correct this with rest breaking. Okay, so in a South African context, we're dependent on rest breaking. Okay. Again, a little bit of physiology. We suspected quite quickly that so the textbook said that the problems were in the bud. That's what we call endodormancy. And yes, there are some problems in the bud, but we suspected very quickly that there were correlative problems. And yeah, to label it easily, they're actually apical dominance problems. Okay, so it's the correlative stuff. And I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but what we did is we took buds off shoots, and we left a piece of shoot without buds, and we looked at the influence of that apical dominance effect on bud burst of a lateral bud. And this is work I did in Belgium, and this is in the cold parts of South Africa, and this is the warm parts of South Africa. And you see this dramatic increase in the apical dominance effect. So the inhibition in Belgium at the end of dormancy was less than 2 days. So whereas in the cold parts of South Africa, it's 6 days. But the moment you move to the warm parts of South Africa, your apical dominance is a month's worth of inhibition of growth. So you see this dramatic increase in apical dominance effects under inadequate chill. Now the textbook tells you it's a bud problem. And what we did is we came along and said, no, it's a bud problem, but it's mostly an apical dominance problem. Okay? And that informed the way that we train trees. Okay, so you're stuck with the climate. What do you do about it? So the one thing we said is, let's stick nursery trees in the fridge. It worked like a charm. Okay, so this was a particularly warm year. That's series weather data. This is Elgin weather data. This year, by the end of August, which is not quite the end of winter, but by this stage, we weren't even at 500 chill units. If you'd stuck the trees in the cold room, you're getting 750 chill units a month. Every hour is a chill unit. And it works like a charm. So stick the tree in the cold room. We plant whips. We want the height. Well, we did until recently. Now we want clean trees. But that's another old debate. You stick it in the cold room, and all the buds burst. Stick it in for 2-3 months, and you solve all your problems. So this is what a 1-year-old, this is late summer, 1-year-old tree looks like in Elgin that had not been in the cold room. Okay, so this is a Crips Red tree. It grows, but you can see the really weak growth at the top of the tree and all of this strong growth in the base of the tree. And we'd bent it, we'd manipulated it, we'd notched these trees, done everything, and you end up with this basal dominant problem. Whereas if you'd stuck the tree in the cold room, which is what happened here, this farm planted a bunch of Crips Red, and some of the lands were too wet to plant, and we stuck the trees in the cold room, and they're the same trees. They came out of the same blocks in the nursery. They're just planted 3 months later out of a cold room, and the leader grows. You got more branches, you got nice acrotonic growth, everything's balanced. So let me go back. That's what happens without cold, and this is what you've got with the cold. And we see it in the regions. The cooler the region, the easier it is to train a central axis. Okay, we did a bunch of work on how rest-breaking agents work. What are they actually doing? And we figured out that one of the big effects, it's not the only effect, but one of the big effects when you apply a rest-breaking agent is you see the release of cytokinins in the xylem sap. So these trees were in Stellenbosch, which is way too warm. You can see that they want to flower around Christmas. This is endogenous cytokinin. It's the zeaxanthin riboside in the xylem sap. And if you put Dormex on the tree, you get much earlier bud burst, but preceding the bud burst, you get this release of cytokinins. We went further. The textbook told us then that the cytokinins come from the root flush. And we went further, and what we did is we took water shoots and we cut them in half, and we removed the xylem sap from the top half and the bottom half separately, and we immediately saw that the cytokinin in the top of the shoot was way ahead of the bottom of the shoot. And that's fairly obvious that it's not coming from the roots. So we figured out quite quickly that cytokinins, the important cytokinins for bud burst, are stored. And we haven't really gone further in this, but we think that the autumn root flush and the autumn nitrogen accumulation in the plant is what's forming the cytokinins. They have to be packed away in the buds, and then you have to get them released in spring with a rest breaking agent. So that's kind of how we do it. Everybody talks about reserves. In our context, we really mean cytokinin reserves and nitrogen compound reserves, and not so much starch. Okay. It's something you learn to pay attention to when you don't have enough chill. All right, the rest breaking agents. Historically, we've always used oil. We're still using oil. The Europeans are telling us right now that we can no longer use mineral oil. We've had some really good progress from a rest breaking point of view with vegetable oils. You guys also use some vegetable oils. They're not so great from a pest control point of view. When you're trying to manage scab and mealybug, they're way less effective. So we might be forced to vegetable oils, or we'll have to arm wrestle the European supermarkets. I can guess who's going to win. The other compound that we had, DNOC, it's off the list. We've used Dormex. Okay. Hydrogen cyanamide. I'm going to talk a little bit more about oil and hydrogen cyanamide, but we've had TDZ, thiazoram. CPPU works just as well. Synthetic cytokinins. Okay, we can talk a bit about them. And the last one on the list is the one that's been around forever and still works, is nitrate. You can use urea, but the nitrate's more effective. Let me show you some of the data we've got on the Dormex. This is a trial I did, trying to understand the interaction between the Dormex and the oil. Okay? And in this trial, you've got a trend that the oil increases bud burst. We've done subsequent work. It definitely increases bud burst. In this trial, it wasn't significant, but we know oil increases bud burst. But the dramatic effect comes from the Dormex. So you have more than a doubling of buds on a shoot when you use Dormex. Okay, and you got your 1 year shoots, you guys grow pears. And you got renewal systems just like us. So you grow a 1 year shoot, you let it spur up, and that's where you bear fruit. So in our context, if you've got less spurs on your 2-year-old units, you're going to pick less fruit, and that's what we found. So this is the effect on the fruit size and the yield the year after rest breaking. And it's not a big effect. You're not affecting fruit size in a big way. You're not affecting numbers. You're affecting the quality. I'll talk about that just now. But the big effect of rest breaking is on the year after that. Okay, and you can see it here in this Dormex data. We're around 15, 16 kilos a tree for the low Dormex rates, and around 23 kilos a tree for the heavy Dormex rates. And that's a substantial increase in yield. So that you're manipulating this year's flowering pattern, but you, very importantly, are growing spurs for the yield a year later. And I always tell growers, especially on pears, they say, do we really need the Dormex? I say yes, not this year, but next year. Okay. The timing of rest breaking, we've done a lot of trials on the timing. It's a very flat curve, you can see it. There is an increase in efficacy closer to bud burst. We don't try and force things early. We're just trying to normalize bloom patterns. And what we say these days is wait for the right weather gap. So we'll always spray post a cold front on rising temperatures. And you wait for the gap in the weather to spray. You don't spray on a calendar date. Okay. Yeah, just a bit on the system that we've got in South Africa. You guys are a few steps ahead of us, I believe, on systems. But when I started, we were talking 4.5 by 2, 4 by 1.5. We had a very formal base and a lot of upright branches. And 20 years later, we'd moved to what we call the solax. We stole the name from the French, but pendant branches. We were looking at some pinks earlier that essentially very similar to our solax. Yeah, we're asking questions about what's next, and we don't have very clear answers at this stage. I think you guys have got some direction already. You know where you're going. Okay, we also have predominantly vigorous rootstocks. Our soils are not great. We're up in the mountains. We've chased altitude, and typically up in a mountain, there's not great soil. This is a floodplain in Shepparton. The soil's much better. We don't have that. So M9 has always been in South Africa. We've never really planted M9, not because it's not a great rootstock. We struggle with M9 with soil temperature. The moment the soil goes over 30 degrees, M9 roots start dying, and then the tree becomes stunted. Your M9's still got a bit of grunt in it with the fruit, and you need that balance. We don't get it with M9. We've planted mostly 793, which is very similar to a 111, 111. In later years, we've planted a lot of M7. We managed the vigor of the tree through bending, managing the light by removing whole branches rather than pruning on the branch, and a lot of girdling. We girdle to get the return bloom on the vigorous rootstocks that don't easily want to do it for you. What's important in our situation on a branch is you've got to transition from vegetative to reproductive. So at some point, the terminal bud needs to make a flower bud. And bending's really important in this regard. There's other things that are also important with bending. Okay? So some French data, old French data, talking about spur quality. You guys will know this. There's a 4 centimeter spur producing 170 gram gala, compared to a 1 centimeter spur producing 140 gram gala. Now, in an environment where you haven't got enough spurs, you also don't have enough good quality spurs. And we're very focused on getting quality spurs. And we do that by bending. And you're trying to stimulate these stronger upright spurs. And you can see this is a granny branch shoot that's been bent down. Look at the difference in bud size there to there. You got double the bud volume. That's double the kilowatts, double the cells, double the reserves, double the everything, and double the fruit size. And what we're trying to do where we don't have enough spurs is to get this bud to set a big fruit and push a healthy burst shoot with a lot of leaves, which will make another big bud and another big fruit. So this was the concept that the French described, burst over burst bearing. We went down that path and got really good results out of it. So this is a big old seedling golden, and by bending the branch, you can see all the tips of the shoots have got fat flower buds. And that's how we've upped yield and quality. Okay, I was going to talk a bit about renewal. I think that's probably a conversation we better do in the orchard. But on the Solax style branches, we're not anti-renewal. We're very aware of renewal. These are peach trees. Early peaches in South Africa, we now renew the entire tree. So we pick the fruit early, cut everything off, and grow a brand new shoot. So it's 100% renewal. We don't renew branches at the rate that the Dutch do. Okay, let's have that debate in the orchard. Yeah, that's the peach tree at the end of year one, or end of the season. It's just, everything's brand new, the whole lot. Okay, there's a lot of interest in the fops. Lots of different names for them, but we've been trying them, and it doesn't look too bad, but if you zoom in, you start to see all of the dormant buds and poor burst shoots and ultimately a bunch of sunburn in our conditions. On anything that's upright, you're not only struggling the lack of chill, you're also struggling with this accentuated apical dominance, which is why in warm climates, you need to have the bent branch. So I can't see these systems working very well in low chilled environments. Okay, just a little bit about bud burst and flowering patterns. Remember, we try and normalize it with rest breaking. This is the Dormex, this is the control. 6 weeks of flowering in the control, 2 to 3 weeks of flowering in the rest breaking. We're trying to normalize the flowering pattern, get the flowers open at the same time. These are grannies at destination. We stripped grannies, but they were clearly not at the same maturity, and they've gone to yellow, but the box has been sorted, but you can see the variation in maturity. We manage that very aggressively with the rest breaking. That's this is one of our biggest fears that we manage. Okay, hot climate. I've spoken nearly all the time about rest breaking and bud burst. Hot climate is not just about spring, it's also about summer. I'm not going to get into the irrigation stuff. Daniel's here. I saw him. There he is. Talk to those guys. But you got to get water through the trunk. Okay, and when the plant is stressed, the stomata are closed. So your irrigation is all about keeping the stomata open so that the plant's actually using the water. I keep arguing with our water guys. We need to use more water. They're telling us to use less. I'm saying, no, we need to use more. Because if I get more photosynthesis, I've got more fruiting potential. Okay, this is a long conversation. We're not going to do it all now. We talk about fruit growth all the time in terms of diameter. If you think like a tree, then you think in terms of dry mass, sugar. And you very seldom see fruit growth curves on dry mass, and this is what the tree is doing. If you look at the mass of fruit on the tree, there's a period of slow growth and then a period of fast growth in terms of dry mass. And this is very dependent, the slope of this curve and the accumulation of dry matter is very dependent on the water relations in the plant. So it's when it's the hottest that you've got to be the most effective. Okay. All right. Where are the solutions? Where do we think the solutions are? Okay. We're not holding our breath for any breakthroughs in rest breaking technology. I don't see anything in the pipeline. I think we're stuck with the compounds that we've got, and in fact, we're losing compounds. The other alternative is to change the genetics. Okay, and this is also a long conversation. But for warm climates, where's Justin? He's busy. That's our week 1 low chill apple. I picked these fruit in Robertson. It was 40 plus degrees for 10 days before harvest. Okay? So they need to be low chill, they need to color, and they need to be able to handle sunburn, the light, the stress. So this is low chill. This is just in the seedling rows. This is a low chill seedling, and the rest of the block's full of medium to high chill stuff. And you can see that, you know, it's chalk and cheese. You can see it. That seedling's happy without the chill. Okay? That's going to have to happen if we go into warmer regions. Color. If it's a red apple, it's got a color when it's 40 degrees. Otherwise, you're not growing red apples. You're growing something different. So these are just different selections out of our breeding program. They all color when it's hot. And that's the kind of thing that we need to find for our environment. And then I downloaded this off the internet. Sunburn's an absolute no-no. It's straight to juice. And I'm just going to go backwards. I mean, those don't burn. And those are burnt. It's fairly obvious. You can get away from this with genetics. I don't see the solution in protective films. There's probably a good solution in netting, but nets make a hell of a lot more sense in an area with hail than an area without hail. So again, that's a longer debate. All right, thanks. That's it. Thank you very much.